Okay, so this really is 2 years ago, terra incognita. There was no evidence going forward of what on earth we would encounter. People didn't know exactly how to respond. In the Greek Archdiocese, they were perhaps some of the fastest to respond, with some fairly strict protocol. And they were led in this discussion by Metropolitan Nathaniel of Chicago, who has a PhD in bioethics, PhD in public health. So he has a little background in this realm. And after 2 or 3 weeks, Archbishop Elpidophoros had a couple ordinations. And he kind of skipped the protocol. And 6 people from one of those ordinations ended up in the hospital right away. And so his leader said, look, you're not listening. You didn't listen to what you even instruct everybody to do. We're going to lose you too. So they clamped down a little bit more. Now, a lot of our bishops are in, and if you were to get a whole list of them, they're in New York, Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, San Francisco. By and large, they're in cities. They're in large cities. Okay. Most of our parishes in the Diocese of the South are not in large cities. And the requests for the clergy were kind of across the board the same. Whether you had a parish of 20 people in North Dakota or a parish of several thousand in Los Angeles, the kind of rules were the same. Because they just didn't want to leave it be a free-for-all. Okay, so yes. In the cities, maybe it was pretty careful. We have a friend who owns a funeral home in Dallas, and he has a partner in New York City. They would go along picking up bodies, and there was nowhere to bury people. The only people who could bury people were Jews because they owned their own cemeteries in New York. Everybody else had to ship people 3 or 4 hours outside of New York City to bury people. Now, our circumstances in Texas were totally different. Yours down here in South Carolina were totally different. But by and large, the bishops were making these decisions, and they were mostly in the larger cities. And you might not believe this, but most of the bishops are over 60. Okay? There are not many teenagers. So, the people that were making decisions were primarily older. The people for whom they were making them, they had in view primarily protecting the more elderly people who didn't quite know what was coming. If you lived in northern Italy, you have some friends in northern Italy, and the people coming back from Chinese New Year into northern Italy, these factories, textile factories, Chinese had brought up in northern Italy, they had the Italians dropping like flies in northern Italy. That's what the reality was. I had friends in Ecuador. People in Ecuador, they were leaving bodies all over the street. Okay. As we know, these things come in waves. Immunity comes in waves. At that time, they didn't have any vaccines. So, yes, let's say that the response was a little too heavy-handed, and it wasn't tailored to the local region. So, nobody had any proof of what was coming. And because of that, there were some rather strict regulations put in place. If we could review a videotape of the last 2 years and have all the data and evidence, well, we would probably do it totally different. But we didn't have a videotape of what was going to happen. And if any of you have done much international traveling over the last 20 years, you may have seen sometimes going through international airports, let me use the right word, Asian people with their faces covered going through the airports, etc., because they've dealt with some of these things. Americans don't like that, especially in the South. You can't tell anybody what to do, especially in North Texas. So yeah, if we had to go through it all over again, and we had some good videotape and evidence and charts, it'd be done differently. But that wasn't available to us at the time. So yes, people are bummed out, upset, other words I won't use, etc. And so people had different reactions. I get it, but I served every single Sunday for the last 2 years, I think. I don't think I missed a day. And I'm still standing, right? But I get it, and the hierarchs had actually responsibility on their shoulders for this. We're fortunate we didn't have to go through things like they have in San Francisco. A clergy person in San Francisco, they had their services broadcast only to parishioners, and they did not distribute communion during the liturgy. They turned the tape off at the end of liturgy, and they had whoever happened to be in church, unnamed, come up and receive communion afterwards. That was one way they went around it, okay? Very carefully. Out the back door into their cars. Everybody did something different, more or less. That was ROCOR, okay? Other places, they had distributing Holy Communion, I think with tongs into their mouth. Okay? All right, everybody did something different. And some people had, you can imagine what it's like in San Francisco, by the way, with Gavin Newsom's buddies all ready to close down a church if they could find that somebody did something wrong. So we weren't under that kind of scrutiny in Dallas, so very fortunate. I'm glad. We didn't have to go through that stuff. So some people rolled with it, etc., and some people are still really upset and angry and resentful, etc. Hey, get on with your lives. Did anybody remember the advertisements for kennel ration? My dog's better than your dog. My dog's better than yours. My dog's better because he eats kennel ration. My dog's better than yours. We have this thing called the heresy of the immaculate jurisdiction. We've come a long ways, but still there's a lot of work to do. Again, it's one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Anything that deviates from that already shows there's a problem in ecclesiology, sacramental theology, everything. Yes, it's the absolutely most unhelpful thing for the Orthodox Church. And we do not have to apologize for anybody's bad decisions. We don't justify anyone's bad decisions. It created an absolute total humanitarian crisis, entire diplomatic crisis. It's a cancer that's taking place right now. We have no idea what mess it's going to lead us all into. It points to a total breakdown in abilities to practice diplomacy. And believe it or not, I'm really naive, but I hope Israel takes a step forward and becomes the key negotiator in this and really pulls off something imaginative. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's just bad news right now for everybody. It's tragic, it's disappointing. We have at least 20 parishioners, I think, from Ukraine in our parish. We have about 25% of our cathedral is from East Europe. About 50% of those are Russia, 50% from Ukraine, with a little balance of people from other places. And the people from Ukraine are mostly Ukrainian. Most of them, however, are Russian-speaking. And they all have relatives. Some have relatives they cannot find, cannot talk to. Others have emigrated over the border to Romania, some back into Russia, some to Western Ukraine. It's an absolute total mess, totally unnecessary, etc., and it's a disaster on every front. Well, we don't live in a vacuum. We live in this world. Yes, for years I lived on top of a mountain in a monastery. But most of us live in this world. We're responsible. We are, in a way, bear some responsibility for the actions and decisions of our leaders, insofar as they are elected leaders. We're responsible also, to some extent, of how those decisions are implemented in our society, the society in which we live. We also have the great privilege in this society of being on juries, in which people are, in which cases are decided or adjudicated and resolved. We have leaders who don't always represent their constituents well, and some that do so shamefully. We have, but also as human beings, we also vote with our money, even where we shop, how we educate our children. The events in which we participate. For example, I hope that you at least have a sense of humor. I spent all of last year teaching our parishioners to go to church on January 6th. Those on the old calendar, they needed to be in church on January 6th for the services for Eve of Nativity. And those on the new calendar be in their churches for the liturgy and blessing of water on Theophany. Actually, people, listen, we had a good turnout this year on January 6, 2020. In the biting cold with a nasty wind blowing down through Dallas, we had an outdoor blessing of water. It was the best one we ever had attended. So it took a little bit of repeating, maybe even a little sarcastically throughout the year, that I expected to be in church in January 6th. So in other words, we can, as priests, speak of the behavior of our parishioners, what we expect them to do, how we expect them to behave themselves. And Orthodox Christians also are responsible for their own choices, the decisions that they make, how they even act out on social media, for example. I get these, people send to me these conspiracy theory videos, links for them every single day. I had one, for example, it's a doormat. And the doormat, it had a picture of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Nancy Pelosi. Orthodox Christian doesn't wipe his feet on people's faces, no matter who they are. You just don't do that. It's not appropriate, no matter who you like or don't like. You don't deface the human face, the image of God in a person. So, and now we're facing the consequences of the fact that people who call themselves Orthodox Christians have escalated conflict to a level of war. And this does not represent us well. It shows that we don't care about the well-being of our neighbor. Now, I know there's a whole backstory to this. I'm very aware of that. And what is the when I started talking about conspiracy theories, by the way, the phone started ringing, yes. Vibrating. I keep it on silent all the time, yes. So, and our task is not simply to condemn. Our task is to be peacemakers, to be merciful, not to walk by on the other side, but to go and pour oil and wine on those who are suffering, and to be creative, to provide solutions, to teach. How many of you are teachers or professors? Okay, excellent. This is an important profession. You come, you shape people, you educate them, you give them tools. This is what we do, and it's sad if for example, if the face of the Orthodox Church in any country is doing something which doesn't proclaim the gospel. This is the absolute worst advertising for our church. In front of your church, you have St. John of the Ladder. And of course, you know what's going to happen. Everybody's going to come into your church, inside your church, they're going to see the scaffolding and sing. That's why it's called St. John of the Ladder Orthodox Church. They have a ladder going up there, and that's heaven up there. You go up there, and they sit up there, and they talk about heaven. Yeah. No, I'm joking. But
well, you can guess how many rungs there are on that ladder.
30. Yes, I know exactly. It's theologically correct, yes. So, yeah, so we, and it's, and that's why right now it's really bad anytime our church somehow becomes the face of conflict. And it's an absolute disaster. And that's why when you brought up the image of someone, especially for a Greek Orthodox hierarch walking side by side with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in a peaceful march, of course, no weapons. This does sends a beautiful image side by side with another human being. And this is what we would prefer to be the image of the church. Or even this year, some of you have maybe passed unnoticed here. And this Sunday, it's actually an appropriate thing to mention. A friend of mine passed away, is it January, I think? Jim Forrest. He was the head of the Orthodox Peace Fellowship. He even wrote a book called The Ladder of the Beatitudes. And I was thinking about him this week. I met him back in, I think, 1990 in Alkmaar in Nederland. Really wonderful man. He came out of a very kind of specific time and place. He came out of the Catholic worker movement in the late 70s and became an Orthodox Christian. And he was very involved in inter-Orthodox work and in inter-Catholic Orthodox work in Europe. He was an expatriate living the rest of his life over in Holland because I think he felt more akin there to being a citizen of that country than being one here in the United States. And I think he would have just been torn in pieces if he heard what was taking place now, kind of undermining of everything and he felt he should stand for. So, what would be the best opportunity? The best opportunity is for Orthodox Christians to do what they believe in doing, even if it costs them, even if they get arrested, thrown in jail. They're not to explode about it. We have, for example, people that go to anti-abortion demonstrations, and sometimes they're arrested, and they go through this process. This is their crime. Okay, and they sit there because they maybe violated a law at a certain point. Okay, but this is the process. They disagree with this law at that time, and so it's always and for us it's a witness to do with our life that in which we believe. So right now there's so many of us that just wish this war would stop tomorrow or today. that somehow people's hearts would be attentive to realizing this is not the path of God, and to do something about it. And those people would be heroes. History would look back at them as heroes. Somebody who at the right time, at the right moment, did something that was the action of a true leader. And that would be a really wonderful, wonderful thing if Orthodox Christians were the ones who were taking the initiative to always make the right decisions and right actions at the right moment. And that would be beautiful. Yes?
Follow-up question on what you're saying. I think there was a great flourishing of religion in the post-Soviet regions, countries, after the fall of communism, but perhaps we exaggerated that. There were a lot of churches built. I still hear statistics that only 1.5% of people in Russia actually go to church. I don't know whether those statistics are true or not, but I've heard 1.5, 1.7. So the question is, the Orthodox Church in Russia is only compromised to the extent that it supports the state in its activities. It supports Putin because it's a close relationship between Putin and Kirill. But is church really to be blamed? You know, I don't know that the majority of people that are out there either being conscripted or doing the fighting or engaging in war crimes or even, you know, that they're necessarily religious people or Christian people. So are we not being tainted by association only because maybe of the perfidy of church leadership?
Yeah, this is part of it. But also, every day in the news, there is a narrative is driven. And there's titles and pictures and captions. And even, for example, a very simple picture, for example, people see a picture of red square, or beautiful square, with an Orthodox church. It says something, even if it has nothing to do with the church making a decision to do those things. People in our country also sometimes make an association of Russian with Orthodox. Okay? And unfortunately, they don't necessarily make the same association with Ukrainian and Orthodox, or Belarusian or people who, their news agencies try to sell news because it needs the money for advertising, which supports them, which pays their salaries. So that's an unfortunate part of it. And but also, I think that our voice is not heard strong enough. And if what people heard throughout the world is that the Orthodox Church does not support bombing or war or things like that, but comes out with specific, clear, consistent statements, then we also are able in that way to express our voice. Or, for example, to point out, okay, what the Church of Romania has done, or the various humanitarian missions. There's always an opportunity to, how do we serve in this manner? Who are the negotiators, for example, who goes over? For example, during the Yugoslavia crisis, for example, they had not only different senators, but they had, for example, different religious leaders that went over there. Some of them were Orthodox Christian leaders that went over there to help negotiate. Some of them were other leaders of other religious bodies. Who's ready to go and speak? Or even in our own parishes, presenting just simply, for example, our people in our parish know that every service we have these lists of the parishioners who have friends and relatives in Ukraine who we're praying for by name in every service. Our people know that. They know that that's where, okay, we're expressing that. And I think this is a good activity by which we express who we are. That we pray. We're ready to contribute. We allow somebody hosting refugees, making it possible. It's whatever we can do. And not necessarily something political. Okay. So that we speak for peace, for prayer, reconciliation, and hospitality, and relief. And that should be how we express ourselves, and not necessarily in a political or journalistic way. But you will find that the voices for peace and reconciliation don't necessarily get that's not what everybody knows. And that's unfortunate.